Hi everyone. I'm going to do my best not to be awkward since I can't see my video or you guys anymore, but I, just based on some of the earlier sessions I saw today, it seemed like a big issue all of us agree on is that there isn't always enough interconnectivity between community interest and the agencies and entities that control the infrastructure that affects those communities. And so I'm always very interested in seeing what people's ideas are for improving that relationship and making sure that the infrastructure is best serving the communities that it should be. And to get started on that, I guess I should probably introduce myself. I'm Jess Butterly. I recently graduated from college, so I'm a very young traffic design engineer. I'm from South Jersey. I went to school in Philly, and now I'm working in Delaware. And having been a resident and also an employee for different agencies in all 3 states, I really am enjoying DelDOT's system of community feedback, so I thought I would talk a little bit about what they're doing to make sure that they're best serving the community, and then open it up to see what anyone else's thoughts or ideas were on the topic. So I guess one of the problems is that there always seems to be a miscommunication between residents and who they need to contact about different things happening in their neighborhood. I know when I was working as a municipal engineer in South Jersey that our little engineering firm that was a consultant that ran all the infrastructure was constantly getting calls where someone would call the township and the township would just send them to us. And sometimes it was folks who could actually give us like complaints about the roadways in ways that we could actually address. But a lot of times it was also folks who should have been directed to Public Works or who should have been directed to contact the one call system. And so I would argue based off that something that would be helpful would be more community outreach about who to contact about what problems, which leads to the question of who should be responsible for being that liaison, who should be advocating for making sure that folks know who to contact in these situations. One nice thing about DelDOT is that they have a public website that shows you all the projects that they're handling at the moment. So as you can see, there's a lot more happening in North Delaware where there is a higher density of projects. And if you click on these tabs, it will tell you about briefly what the project is, and it'll tell you what phase it's in and when you should expect the construction or the planning. It'll also give you a link to their website. Sorry, my computer's super slow. And on the website, it'll give you the latest updates on the project, any traffic impacts, and it'll also tell you when there's going to be a public forum. So I think that DelDOT having this system in place is a really excellent way of communicating with the public. One of the ways this might be hard to implement in other jurisdictions, though, is that in Delaware, DelDOT owns almost all of the roads. I know in New Jersey, roadways can be owned by a few different entities, including local towns, the state, the county, and also some private roadways. And in that case, it's going to be a lot harder to compile all that information because then you need to have communication between all those entities. So when we get to the more discussion-y part, if anyone has any ideas of whether or not they like the system DelDOT has or how they could implement it in different areas, I would love to hear that. DelDOT also has a report an issue tab, and it probably would be nicer if this was a bit more clear and less hard to navigate to. But when you find this tab, basically any roadway or infrastructure problems you see, they will tell you if it's an emergency. You can contact their TMC. If it's not an emergency, you have, the option to. They have all the different types of things that you might be concerned about. You give the address and the detailed description and your contact information, and then based on how you filled this out, it'll be able to direct that complaint to the proper organization. For example, if there's a dead animal in the road, that would be Public Works. But if there is traffic delay, traffic signs, work zones, those would all go to the appropriate section in DelDOT. And there can be some bureaucracy about when the problem is addressed. It might go through a few different folks and take a few months to actually start addressing that problem. But I haven't seen organizations or municipalities that have a similar program like this. So I do like that Delaware does have this option. Again, this would be a harder thing to implement in a state where the ownership of different transportation entities is kind of diversified. And I guess I'm just gonna pull up this Word tab and jump into kind of the discussion and open it up to you guys. Hopefully there's still some folks here. But I would love to hear about how you are able to communicate with your local infrastructure managers, and also discuss who should be accountable for making sure the public is involved with infrastructure decisions, and what are some ways we could distribute information so that if there are resources like DelDOT has, how do we make sure that folks actually know where to go and how to get to them? So yeah, I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Hey, this is Alea Carey from Transit Happy. Nice to see you guys. See some of us. I'm interested to be here. I'm going to lay back and let the agency side take it first a little bit. I'm curious about how to get the messaging out. That's sort of my area of interest. How do you promulgate that these kinds of services are available? You know, these kinds of interactive moments are available where people can contribute. But I'd like to hear from other people what is actually available, what their organizations are doing. So just saying, hey.
Yes, I work in the private side, but just from like a resident, you know, I don't think that a lot of reporting systems are very user-friendly, especially for people who are not, you know, like in the transportation industry. And, you know, I live in Philadelphia, so, you know, it's like, do you reach out to, I mean, within Philly, you reach out to, you know, Philadelphia County, but in other municipalities and other counties within Philly, I think it gets even more complicated, or within Pennsylvania it gets more complicated. You know, you have, like you were saying, Jess, you have, you know, the county, then you also have like different owners of roads, whether it's local, private. So I think it makes it kind of tricky when you're trying to figure out who you should connect to. And I don't think there's really, like, it seems like since DelDOT doesn't have that issue, it's much easier to report an issue. So I don't know the best way to, maybe if all the different entities kind of work together more to have like a platform that they all jointly connected in or something like that. I don't know exactly how that would work, but you know, then it would have all updated information, and then if someone had a question about a specific thing, then maybe it would target or you know, like notify a certain entity that, like, who it's supposed to go to, instead of getting in, you know, a rabbit hole of, oh, you're in the wrong place, this isn't where you're supposed to be, and kind of then trying to find people. I don't know, just some thoughts.
I mean, isn't this a 311-like system? right? I mean, at least in the phone days, right, there was 311 and you would call it and you would say, I have a problem, and then they would direct it. So, I mean, we're able to do such coordination for 911 systems as well. So, I mean, I don't know that there is any, I mean, it seems like this has been done before, and maybe we should see how the 311 systems are set up or something like that. So I'm not in Philadelphia. So is there such a system in Philadelphia to report sort of non-emergency, but, you know, like weird problems?
I know that Philly also has a 311 system. It's not like you'll get any sort of immediate response if you ever get a response. So it's kind of like you put it out there. You know, I know, like, I've reported potholes and things, or you know, I've talked to neighbors who have done things like that, and I think it just gets pushed into a long list of to-do items that the city has, and I don't really know how they sort it out, or if it gets distributed. I don't know how that process works.
I mean, it's not clear that this reporting system for DelDOT, you know, is going to give you instant results either. I mean, you're going to report it and it's going to get into the same queue. I'm guessing at least.
Yeah, so I work for a private company that does contract work for DelDOT, and there's a lot of factors that go into how quickly there is a response to different issues. And I can't speak to all the different infrastructure issues just because there's so many. But personally, I specifically work on projects that involve horizontal curbs and how they are impacting the safety of individuals traveling along there, which can be anything from site distance issues, whether or not the curb is safe to navigate with or without signing, do we need to upgrade the pavement, and the signing along there. And the timetable for those kind of projects will be dependent on how long or how large is the site that we need to look at, how many complaints have we gotten about this, is there a local legislator who is also advocating for us to address this, and are we aware of there being any fatalities or injuries along this area of the project. So you're looking at a time frame of a few months to occasionally over a year to address different problems. But, so not fantastic, but also I have gotten projects where we'll get notification that there's been a fatality at a curb, and we have new plans to upgrade safety features along that curb within the next month, which a month is still a long time, but not terribly, terribly long in terms of infrastructure, I would say, in my opinion. Oh, and then the last step of that process is when everything's complete and we have our work orders in and everyone's in agreement, we do send emails back to the resident who had the initial concern to let them know that we investigated the site and these are the recommendations that we are providing at this time. And if it's a site where there's a few different curbs and we focused on just the most dangerous, we'll say we've addressed this location and we have the rest of the corridor slated to be investigated at a future time. I think with a lot of other places, even if you submit a complaint, you don't always get that feedback. And it can be really hard to individually contact everyone who makes a complaint. So do you guys think there's any value in trying to hold more public forums? And also, now that we've all learned that we can use Zoom, do you think it'd be beneficial to start holding virtual forums to try and increase visibility and transparency between local agencies and the constituents they serve.
I think, well, one question I sort of have when you were saying how long it was taking to do certain sorts of things, where are the bottlenecks? That's sort of what I then want to know. Okay, why is that taking you a year? Why can't you tell some, you know, is there a way you, it's hard to get people to engage with the system if it takes them 6 months to hear back. I think that's going to be an issue here. But beyond even that, you know, why are there bottlenecks like 6 months, a year, or even a month? Why, you know, how do we, is anyone sort of cataloged why this takes so long?
I would say, just from my experience, the reason for the bottlenecks is just the sheer volume of requests we have, and kind of applying the principles of first aid, where yes, we've had this request sitting longer, but we're going to prioritize one where there's more public interest in fixing it, and also a more, it seems that the safety here is more pressing than safety issues at other sites. So the priority would be safety. And then once we've like addressed our most pressing concerns, we do go back and we try to address, at least full disclosure, I have been in EIT for 6 months, so I'm very, very new to the field. And I'm just kind of discussing what I've seen from my side. But my big goal of being a civil engineer is I want to make sure that I am doing my best to always be advocating to make sure that the communities that we should be serving are the primary source of where our efforts are going.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually hosted a discussion that was fairly similar to early today morning. But it wasn't so focused on, you know, trouble ticket reporting, sort of, but it was more on sort of public input in general. And then it got hijacked by somebody who wanted to talk about his solution to do hybrid meetings. But until then, we were having a discussion in which people were sort of saying, I think one of the things out of that original conversation that might or might not be applicable to what you wanted to talk about here is we had someone there who said that they felt like public input is frequently like a box that needs to be checked. But by the time a project gets to the point where you're getting public input, you know, it feels like maybe some of the decisions have already been made, or, you know, the project is already being steered in some direction, and so on and so forth. So that is not really related to, you know, the ticket issue that you're talking about here. But I think it's more about public engagement in general. So I don't know if people wanted to discuss that and whether you feel that way as well.
No, I think you're right. I think a lot of times before it even comes before the public, there's a lot of discussions between the developer and political entities and state-run agencies about what they're doing, and there's already a huge portion of the planning in place before we start holding public forums. So I guess the question...
What the person said was, you know, she's been in these things where you have the yellow post-its and the pink post-its and the green post-its, and you put all of them, and then theoretically you're supposed to go back and, you know, distill that public input, but she doesn't think it works. And then we got sidetracked in the virtual meeting, and we never actually finished that thought. And I don't want it to hijack your meeting, but if this is something that you're interested in, we could talk a little bit more about that aspect.
Oh, of course, absolutely. I don't think of me as someone who's like running this, and I'm just very interested to see what other folks' ideas and opinions are, and also what the main problems are with serving the public. So if you were concerned about making sure that we prioritize public comments, I think that is a wonderful talking point, and I would be glad to help facilitate that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like, and maybe tying this back into the virtual meeting question that you had. I mean, one thing that I do think the virtual meetings help is to make it easier for people to participate. Because otherwise, if you have a lot of physical meetings, then you have to take 3 hours off your day to go there and hang out and give the public input. But the kinds of projects that you're talking about here, where it's a condition information thing, it actually doesn't ever go to a public forum, right? So are you more interested in looking at these kinds of small projects that basically staff just handles, or are you more interested in the sort of bigger design projects where there's like a formal public input process? What is what are people here generally interested in, I guess?
I would say, personally, just on my end, and don't let this impact anyone else's opinion, I'm a little bit more interested in the smaller day-to-day projects. Of course, major infrastructure projects are going to impact a community, but I think what folks are looking for isn't whether or not they're expanding I-95. They're looking for, I think this curb in my neighborhood is dangerous. The roadway here has a lot of potholes. I'm worried about the segment of roadway flooding and making sure that those are addressed. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually going to thank you for hosting this session, because I often feel like in this sort of world, I realize it's a lot of urban planners, but they just love to gloss over the whole O&M piece, the operations and maintenance, the whole life cycle. It's all about sort of planning and then ribbon cutting, and in reality there's a life cycle to all of these things, and we have to think through, do they actually perform? It's great to plan, it's great to build, is it actually functioning? And I just feel like that question just gets lost a lot of the time. So I'm really glad you're hosting this session, because I feel like you are getting to that. Is this functioning? Is this doing what it's supposed to do? So it would be great to make this more sort of like how do I say this? It would be great if there was like an agile principle that we could sort of fold in here. So it's sort of like we can, build this, tie this in a bit more tightly with planning. I don't know if I'm quite making sense, but the idea being we can iterate. You can get feedback quickly and show people that there's movement, even if it takes you a year, just somehow show movement, somehow show there's a process going on and that we're making iterative decisions. If we thought this curve was going to be used in this way, and lo and behold, it's being used in a totally different way, or we were thinking weather was going to cause this sort of impact, and lo and behold, it's having a different kind of impact. If we could just sort of tie that in more tightly with everything else, I think would be a great thing to see, but I don't know that I'm making sense.
No, I understand where you're coming from. It's that follow through with not just telling the public, hey, we did this and it's finished, but then going back and looking at and seeing, is this portion of infrastructure we improved or we built functioning like we thought it would? If it's not, what is it doing? And just letting the public know, like, hey guys, we built this, we've been monitoring it. That's a good way to put there. And just making sure everyone is in the loop.
And showing the whole decision-making process of why you're fixing this pothole, why you're fixing this curve, why X or Y. Well, we're doing this because we got all this feedback, and we're showing you the feedback as it's happening. And as a result, we found this was really a safety problem, and we had to prioritize it, versus something that maybe was a nuisance, but basically was doing its job. We designed it to do this function, and it's doing it, and it's not threatening lives. It's not, you know, it might not be pretty, but it's doing what we need it to do. And so we'll make it, you know, beautifying it, you know, putting shrubs around this pot or whatever, or, you know, this sort of roundabout or something. Nice, it's a great thing to do. You know, your life isn't going to be impacted whether we do it or not, or won't be impacted right away, kind of thing.
Gotcha. I think
that actually came up in the morning discussion too, but more around the idea of, you know, I think it was, if I remember right, like, so the example that the other person gave, and I'm paraphrasing them, okay, but it could actually help with planning as well, because if you're putting in a light rail along the freeway, then, you know, people might push back and say, oh, you're taking away freeway lanes to put in the light rail. But having the light rail could actually reduce congestion on the freeway because people have an alternative. And so even for bigger projects, you know, there's sort of like, how do you communicate to people what the real impacts are? And maybe the best way to communicate those impacts is just to kind of do them in a sort of simple way, and then, you know, they can see it for themselves.
Do people care though? I mean, do they care that much? I know we care because we care, but I don't know.
I think people would do express. I have heard frustrations from people about unresponsive government. And, you know, sometimes people are surprised to hear the biggest way people found the cities learned about potholes is literally grandma calling 311 and saying there's a pothole. And, you know, I mean, who cares is actually a much bigger question, because obviously if you're working 3 jobs and you're very impacted by this or that thing, you may not have the bandwidth to call 311. Grandma who's 85 and not doing much has got all the bandwidth in the world for 311. So there are questions about that, for sure.
Before lockdown, I worked at a company on JFK, and in all of my jobs, the cleaning lady has always been my best friend, because I work late, you know, so I leave when they are vacuuming, and, you know, they're like, can I come in and take the trash out? And so one time I was having a deep discussion about transportation with the cleaning lady, and she was telling me that because her shift ends at 11:45, she doesn't have enough time to get from JFK over to Broad Street to get the bus back to North Philly, and the Broad Street line is too scary for her to take because of the walk from the station to her home. And, you know, she has a lot of concerns, so sometimes she takes an Uber. And I was like, well, how much does that cost if you have to do that every night? And she's like, well, you know, if we do it at the right time, and if I share it with my buddy, then it's like $7 per person. And I was like, what? Every day? And, like, they care, right? They care. But I think that the intelligence of how do you wire that into a channel that responds to you effectively, that knowledge isn't there. And I think that's a disconnect that we have for communities and transportation. They need to be worked on.
I agree with you totally. I agree with you totally, and that is what I meant by who cares. It's not that people, like your example here, it's not that they don't care, they just don't necessarily have the bandwidth to get through this website and report in, or even, you know, just think about 311. If she's worried about just getting home safely, is she thinking about, well, while I'm on this 311 call, while I'm on my Uber ride, I'm going to make this 311 call because I'm going to complain about how unsafe the route is or something like that. Or I
think it's interesting now that when everything is shut down, and I'm talking about Philadelphia, certainly any large urban center as well, but we see SEPTA having more of a response about social issues all of a sudden, because I've heard people refer to the Broad Street, to the L concourse as Philadelphia's toilet, you know, and there's so many problems down there, drug use, homelessness, whatever you want to say. But now they're forced because it's affecting ridership and it's affecting cleanliness, and they're forced to look at it and address it in some way. So I think that's an interesting paradigm shift too. It's forcing responsiveness.
It'll be very interesting to see how all of that fares as we hit a new normal. And I'll just be very curious to see. I don't know, though. I can see a lot of... Yeah, I don't know.
Very.
So what is your traffic on this website? For, like, how many hits do you get? And do you have, like, do you have any sort of KPIs you've developed, or are you still developing them? You know, any key performance indicators about what you're looking to, you know, what kind of traffic you're hoping to see?
I think those are excellent questions. Unfortunately, I have no way of actually answering them. I don't work for DelDOT. I don't have access to their numbers. I'm just a little contractor who DelDOT makes all the decisions about priorities. And I just try to discuss how those priorities are sorted just from my view. I can't actually speak in any capacity on DelDOT's behalf or even on the company I work for's behalf.
Right.
But I would agree that if the point that you're starting to get to is we should be looking at the traffic and how it's being used and kind of use it as a metric for how do we improve it, I would totally agree. I guess sometimes the problem is just like how for residents they don't always have enough energy or the ability to know who or where to report to. On the agency side of things, everything's always on fire. So you have to prioritize which little fires you're putting out, and it can be hard to move into a place where instead of just addressing problems as they happen, actually foreseeing problems and optimizing things that aren't necessarily a problem but making it easier for folks.
Mm-hmm.
So are you working on the new shutdown of 95? Jess?
So I haven't been working, so I think also because I'm very new, a lot of the projects I've been doing are really small and local, which I'm personally enjoying. My company does do capital projects. I'm not sure if we have any involvement with I-95 currently. I will say I've experienced the new shutdown of I-95 in Wilmington, where it's down to one lane in an absurd corridor with little cattle chutes. And I'm very excited for that project to reach its end. And in the meanwhile, I'm just going to avoid Wilmington.
Agreed. So, you know, what's interesting about that project in terms of DelDOT's response to it is that the one thing that's different compared to other portions of 95 that they've done is that this one has had an incredible public outreach campaign with huge billboards and huge variable message signs on the on-ramps and off-ramps. And then the whole 202 corridor is blasted with billboards. And it's just like, hey, you know, this is coming up, and here's our website if you have any, you know, questions about what's going on. And it's interesting because that pocket, that Wilmington pocket there, which my dad used to say was the worst corridor of I-95 in the whole entire I-95, and he would drive down to Quantico every other week. It's so bad, but it ties into the tri-state area, so it's so pivotal in terms of work and shopping and living, and I can't even imagine what it's going to be like when people are going down to the Delaware beaches the summer. So it's so critical to immobilize it like that, you know, people are pissed, right? And so their response is to up their public outreach campaign, which is interesting. And, you know, I don't know what the effect is because we don't have any access to their data, but it's nice to see that they did that a little differently than they've done before, even when they had the bridge collapse a few years ago. It's better than that.
Yeah, it's funny. I did not hear about the Restore the Corridor project from work. I heard about it from my local radio station because it would get mentioned at least once on my ride to work and my ride back home. And my ride's only like 15 minutes. So I guess I've been geeking out about how much I appreciate DelDOT. I know that's silly, but I've been under the jurisdictions of lots of different infrastructure agencies, and I've been finding Delaware very refreshing. And I, every day on the radio now, as I'm going in and out of work, when they do the traffic report, they do mention the Restore the Corridor project. They've been talking about what the alternative routes are, and then they will tell you what the status is of those alternative routes. And I'm not sure how much of that is from DelDOT telling them that this is something they need to focus on, or I think otherwise it just shows that DelDOT has been communicating with local news sources to make sure that information is dispersed about how to kind of work through the current project they're doing and kind of diffuse the volume in the area. So also big shout out to North Delaware's local radio stations and news sources, because I think they've also been responding to this really well. And I'd be curious to see how DelDOT's been coordinating, or if it's been more so the news sources coordinating with DelDOT.
And they have good Christmas tunes.
Oof, absolutely. So we've talked a lot about Delaware, but this is I can't spell. I think a lot of folks who come to the PHL transportation camp are in Philly, and also there's always infrastructure projects happening in Philly. So do you guys have any personal stories about how your local agencies did or didn't communicate big ongoing projects in the area? It doesn't have to be Philly, just from wherever you're from.
So I mean, I think at least over here, so this is not big infrastructure projects. This is going back to small infrastructure projects. But in the city that I live in California, they send out postcards to, I think, everybody within a 2-block radius of the small project that's affected. I don't know how much of an impact that has on anything, but I have received those, and so I know that they exist. Do they do something similar on the East Coast as well?
The closest I've seen is that we were doing an environmental impact project next to some residents, and we had to send, I forget what it's called when you send a letter certified. We had to send certified mail to the residents closest to that project to let them know, like, this is going to happen and you'll have an opportunity to comment on it. But for the most part, almost every public project I've seen doesn't actually do that, where it specifically reaches out to folks who might be impacted on the smaller projects. I think that's great, though probably really expensive.
One of my old firms had we did public outreach, and we were working on a project for the Delaware River Port Authority. It was a PACO shutdown. They're doing station renovations, and so we had to distribute flyers to, I guess, Collingswood, Haddonfield community, and the guy who was delivering the flyers skipped a couple of blocks or whatever, and the prime on the project found out about it because I guess the neighbors complained, like, why did so-and-so get a flyer and I didn't? And I'll tell you, he got a can of whoop-ass loaded on him. So people do take it seriously, but it's more like flyer distribution here, not direct mail.
Yeah, I think that they typically have like, so I mean, every project here, you know, the city council has to approve. And so there'll be a little postcard saying the city council is going to discuss this project, you know, on Thursday at 6:30 p.m. or whatever. And so this is how you can contact them. So actually, maybe is that actually the same? So in Philly, or in the East Coast in general, I guess, does your city council actually vote on all of these projects? At least the sort of medium-sized ones?
No, I mean, if it's a broad city project or even regional, you know, there would be so many little communities involved in it that the community itself doesn't have jurisdiction over it. It's run by the agency. So the agency would take the direct lead in posting it, usually to a website or through some kind of direct blast through media or a notice in the newspaper, something like that.
Okay, that's interesting.
Do you think there will be a huge benefit to better integration between local government and larger infrastructure entities? I know there was some discussions earlier. I think the session might have just ended. But I guess my kind of final statement would be that there are some loose systems in place to make sure that infrastructure agencies are held accountable and communicating with the public. But I would personally like to see more coordination between local and state government and use them as a liaison to best coordinate these efforts, and also keep accountability for both the political and the actual management side of these projects.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jess. And everyone, you can continue the conversation and networking and just checking in GatherTown. The link, it's the same link as this morning, the same code to get in. So I hope to see you all there. Thanks for the session, Jess.
Thank you so much, everyone. This went infinitely better than I was expecting. I really appreciate all your comments. This was great.